Okay, good morning and welcome to the February Q&A live stream. I hope you're all having fun. Not too many people on the live stream today. That's okay. We've got some great questions to answer. Let's check in with the chat room and make sure the audio and video is going well. Let me know if you can see and hear me okay. Now, this time I'm coming to you from a tiny, tiny room in a tiny, tiny hotel with a tiny, tiny internet connection. So I hope you'll be patient with me. I anticipate that some of this will be a bit rough in terms of the audio and video. We may have some problems with the internet. However, I am making a copy, a high-definition, high-quality copy of this video so that I can rebroadcast it after we're done at much higher quality. So if it cuts out, let me know in the chat, and I'll do my best to try and fix it. I might have to reduce the video quality a bit, and then we'll continue. OK, give me a second. I think I need to adjust the gain on my mic because it's cutting out a tiny bit. 1 second. All right. A few minor technical problems. You know how it is. All right, so everybody who's watching live, say hi in the chat room. If you don't know where the chat room is, check to the side of the video. There's a little pop-up chat. Say hello. Drop some emojis. Make it fun. And I will get started in just a second. I still need to make a small adjustment to this video. 1 second. Testing, 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 testing. There we go. Oh, that was fun. OK. Just having some problems there. My microphone was peaking. So now it should be nice and clear. All right. We've got people from Indonesia and Budapest and New Jersey and New York and Santa Cruz and Catalonia and Philadelphia. And Argentina, Canada. This is lovely. I really appreciate how people from all over the world are joining me on these live webcasts so we can have some fun and answer some questions. North Carolina and Warsaw and the UK and France, and everybody's jumping in now. I think you get the theme. This is definitely an international crowd all over the place. All right. Why don't we get started and answer some damn questions? Let's go. Jerome asks, hi, Andreas. At the end of the December Q&A, you said we have a limited window of time left to get Bitcoin to be completely anonymous. If not, it goes to layer 2 and won't work. You also said that 100% anonymity will become table stakes in all of crypto. Do you think we're going to get it in time before the window of anonymity closes? So I've been talking since 2013 about this idea that protocols ossify. Ossify from the Latin word osso, which means bone. Basically, they gradually get harder and harder until they turn to bone. What does that mean? That means that when you have a protocol like Bitcoin, or as we've seen with other protocols like TCP/IP in the past, and that protocol becomes successful and is broadly used, people start building software, and then they start building hardware around the protocol. So they start embedding the software and the protocol into various devices. So you'll see, for example, already we have a number of companies making nodes, software that goes in nodes. And that means that every time something changes in the protocol, all of these nodes need to be updated. Over time, we're going to see the Bitcoin protocol get embedded deeper and deeper in hardware. So eventually, you'll see it as firmware on chips. And in that case, it becomes much more difficult to update. Think about your Wi-Fi router, for example. Its implementation of TCP/IP is embedded in firmware. And in order to update it, you need to basically load a new firmware file and reboot your router and all of that. But there's so many other devices around you that have embedded protocols in them. So the idea here is that the longer a protocol survives, the more mainstream it becomes, the more useful it is, the more likely it is to gradually become more and more difficult to change. To me, that means the window of opportunity for making changes to the core protocol, to the base layer of Bitcoin, is beginning to close. And that means that it's going to get more and more difficult to make change, especially controversial changes. And I think privacy is going to be a controversial change. Consider, for example, the fact that changes to privacy are going to affect many of the organizations that currently have obligations under the law to do know your customer and anti-money laundering reporting and regulations like that. Can they support a Bitcoin protocol that has strong privacy protections in it when they can't know everyone who's participating in a transaction, or they have even more limited access? I expect companies like that are going to resist the introduction of privacy features. And we may see, in fact, difficulty in introducing these features in anything other than a soft fork. Fortunately, I think most of the interesting features for privacy can be introduced by a soft fork in the base layer, and the protocol can still be extended by soft forks, thanks to a very important change that happened in 2017. And that was the introduction of SegWit. With the introduction of SegWit, one of the very, very critical features that was introduced was a thing called SegWit versioning. And with SegWit versioning, the scripting language that's used within a transaction in Bitcoin now has a version number, and that version number can introduce new functionality without doing a hard fork. So the first version of SegWit introduced in 2017 was SegWit version 0, because we count things from 0. And because it's actually in the protocol as the prefix of a SegWit script is the number 0. And we can upgrade that by adding a new version. So you can have SegWit version 1. The proposed changes to SegWit version 1 include some important new technologies that can introduce new privacy techniques. For example, Schnorr signatures, taproot, graph-root, Merkleized abstract syntax trees, and things like that. I expect we're going to see those introduced before the end of 2020 in Bitcoin as a soft fork. I'm hoping that's not the end, and that we will also see other changes that further enhance privacy. Fortunately, one of the things that works the benefit of Bitcoin is that the introduction of other cryptocurrencies that are privacy-focused allows for extensive research to be done across the entire ecosystem that benefits Bitcoin as well. So, for example, we've discovered some potential bugs that I'll be talking about in one of the next questions in ZK snark implementation in Zcash. And that is quite a big challenge, but it's being done in such a way that everybody in the ecosystem learns from mistakes and bugs like that. So I expect we're going to see more features in privacy, and I don't think we're going to have a problem with introducing those features in Bitcoin. But we'll see. This is a big challenge ahead. All right, let's go to the next question. 1 second. JJ asks, theoretically speaking, are Bitcoin soft forks always fully reversible without a hard fork? Since the reverse soft fork rules do not introduce new consensus rules, does this mean a soft fork can be reversed with another soft fork, or simply by abandoning the soft fork rules and using the original ones without a hard fork? As a thought experiment, could theoretically even SegWit be fully reversed without a hard fork? Yes. Theoretically, soft forks can be reversed with a soft fork. The impact, however, will be quite significant on the features of the protocol. So the difference between a hard fork and a soft fork, and if you're interested in this topic, you should watch a video I've done called Forkology, which is about how different forks work and the implications they have. Soft forks constrain the rules, so they adopt a narrower set of rules. Now, if you have a soft fork in place like SegWit, which adopts a narrower set of rules on what is acceptable and enforces new rules within the system, then old nodes can operate without a backwards compatible change. But old nodes can continue to operate with the old rules, and it's a backward compatible change. If you wanted, however, to reverse that, you could still do that, but it would have an impact on the nodes following the new rules. So those nodes would be knocked out of consensus if you reverse the soft adequate consensus from all of the nodes. But it could be reversed without a soft fork. So without a hard forks can be reversed with a soft fork. You don't need a hard fork to reverse them. You can go back to the previous rules without breaking consensus with older nodes. However, in the case of something like SegWit, that is not a reversible change in practice. And the reason it's not a reversible change in practice is that once SegWit was activated, under the old rules, SegWit funds come at risk if you change the rules. So anybody who's using SegWit in order to store their funds, if somebody suggested reversing SegWit, would not really accept the consensus because that would put their funds at risk. So SegWit is a soft fork that isn't reversible without causing damage to the network, and therefore there won't be consensus to reverse something like SegWit. So it depends on what the fork does exactly. And I think it's extremely unlikely to almost impossible that we will see any soft fork reversed unless there's a critical emergency that requires it. Gareth asks, Monero and Zcash are invaluable to people in authoritarian regimes who want to try to protect their wealth from government confiscation and inflation. I wonder if the new implementations of MimbleWimble, such as Grin and Beam, will be a better option than the existing privacy coins, such as Monero or Zcash. MimbleWimble is a much smaller, more efficient blockchain and can store more transactions. Can you see it displacing the current top 2 privacy coins over time? I don't know. I think it's important to realize that MimbleWimble has different trade-offs, both in terms of security and privacy, as well as in terms of efficiency and scalability. And I like to see this experimentation continue across all of the privacy coins, because it enables us to see how different trade-offs and different privacy techniques can be used and what their pros and cons are. And perhaps in the future, we can see more of those privacy techniques combined so that we see a lot of, let's say, cross-pollination between the research and development teams in these various privacy coins and other coins. So techniques invented in one place are used in another. That's one of the wonderful things about working in a broad open source ecosystem like cryptocurrencies and open blockchains, where an invention made in one place can be used anywhere else. It's not encumbered by patents or you know, and even if it is under open source, that doesn't really matter. So we will see a lot of cross-pollination. Whether Grin and Bean displace the current two privacy coins over time, I don't know. It depends what you mean by displace. If you mean that they might rise to have a larger market cap, I don't really think those metrics are meaningful. The question is, do these new technologies offer more choices for people operating under conditions where privacy is absolutely essential? And I think they do. So do they displace? There really isn't. This isn't a zero-sum competition. Grin and Bean can thrive and grow both together as well as against the other privacy coins without really any sacrifices. Is not a zero-sum competition. So I'm actually hoping to see not only these privacy coins, but more privacy coins develop and explore other areas. That's the only way we learn. Of course, not all of them are going to survive or succeed or flourish. That's okay, too. These experiments are not about winning. They're about offering choice and exploring different avenues. With the chat room quickly, how are things going with audio video? Are you enjoying this live stream where you are this Saturday morning, afternoon yet? Should I just go on to the next question? Why am I delaying? I just want to check in with you. Let me know in the room, and I'll get back to it in just a second. Stuttery. Okay. Audio breaking. I'm going to turn down the video quality just a tiny bit. I apologize for these horrendous bandwidth conditions. The thing is, you know, here's the problem. Here's the problem. I'm currently in a third world country called California, where bandwidth shortages due to government cartel and monopoly control have devastated the poor people of California. And as a result, you see the quality of my connection is pretty poor. We have one of those government monopoly service providers here called American Telephone and Telegraph. And as you know, because they've been specializing in telegraph primarily, and then just recently introduced telephone in their inventory of technologies, they're a bit behind the times. So I promise you I will give you much better audio and video quality when I'm in a first world country, like, for example, when I'm in Seoul, South Korea, where they have the highest speed bandwidth in the world. Yes, as you know, USA, number 34 in broadband. 1 second. Yes, I did have a better connection in Argentina, right? No currency, fucked up banks, but they sure had good internet. All right. It's like Morse code. I know. Let me turn down the video quality just a tiny bit. I'll just keep turning it down until I'm transmitting 1 pixel for my entire face. So it will just be 1 black pixel that moves up and down. We are capturing a high quality video, which is what we're going to edit and republish after this is over. So you can come back and watch it in high def. It keeps coming in and out, so I can't really promise you that it's going to work perfectly. But let's continue. Let's continue. What are your thoughts on VeriBlock being responsible for almost 1/4 of Bitcoin transactions in January by using the op return script for proof of proof? This is a question by Jonathan. I'm not familiar with the case of VeriBlock, but nevertheless, let's assume that that's an accurate representation, and VeriBlock is indeed using 1/4 of all Bitcoin transactions in January. Jonathan asks, could this and other such uses of the Bitcoin blockchain have an impact on the fee market such that it affects the use of Bitcoin as money? This is a great question because this thing comes up a lot. What is a valid transaction and what is a spam transaction on the Bitcoin system? And the answer is really simple. We have two ways of determining whether a transaction should and should not be on the Bitcoin system. One possible way to do that is to set rules in the protocol that make a difference between what is spam and what is not spam. Basically, allow the developers of the Bitcoin Core protocol to pick and choose winners and losers by determining which applications should innovate and which should not, based on some determination, qualitative, normative judgment of what is a valid use case of Bitcoin and what is not. And you might think that that's an easy answer. Money is the right thing. Everything else is superfluous, extraneous, not really relevant. But then again, which applications of money? Is multisig money enough, or is that fancy scripting and programming? What about Lightning Network? Should that be allowed? Maybe some of the original core developers are not so interested in Lightning. What about time locks and other things like that? What about other forms of smart contracts? This is a very slippery slope. So in Bitcoin today, we use a market-based mechanism. And the market-based mechanism is really simple. The fee market enables pricing of transactions based on supply and demand that allows the market, and especially the sender of a transaction, to signal to the network through their selection of fees what importance that transaction has to them, how important that transaction is to them, and thereby pricing the cost of transaction space across the entire market vis-a-vis other applications that might not be as important. And what this is pricing is not just whether the transaction is confirmed or not, but more importantly, how fast the transaction is confirmed. In this particular case, the market is pricing VeriBlock's transactions, which are using 1/4 of the Bitcoin blockchain for proof of proof. And apparently, that's how much of the capacity the market is pricing to allocate in that particular application. Does it affect the use of Bitcoin as money? It certainly prices that scarce resource. And what it does is this fee market prevents people from attacking the network with denial of service attacks and spam attacks because it causes a cost, because it makes it costly to post transactions that are not important to the sender. So spam is expensive on Bitcoin because of transaction fees, and that prevents attacks against the network. I haven't had any difficulty making my transactions. I haven't had any difficulty making them on the Bitcoin blockchain with SegWit. I haven't had any difficulty making them on Lightning and opening and closing channels. I always use the absolute minimum fee possible, 1 Satoshi per byte. I use replace by fee transactions just in case I want to bump the fee later because it's not going through. But honestly, I haven't bumped a fee in 6 months or more. And the transactions I make, which I make very regularly on a weekly basis, get through within the first or second block. So is this a problem for the Bitcoin network? No, it isn't. And there's nothing wrong with using 1/4 of all Bitcoin transactions as long as you pay for them. The issue here is that we need to understand that in the absence of a fee market, what is the alternative? In the absence of a market-based solution to prioritization and capacity management, resource allocation within the Bitcoin blockchain, we can do one of two things. One, we can assume that resources are infinite or near infinite, and that just giving free transactions to everyone will not have any economic impact. What that will do effectively is it will subsidize those who are sending transactions, and it will subsidize miners through other means, probably inflation, and cause further centralization of nodes and, more importantly, mining to fewer and fewer hands. So there's a cost. Instead of paying that cost in fees to maintain decentralization, you pay that cost by losing decentralization behind the scenes in a subtle, long-term way that is less easy to detect. That is a very dangerous path. And we've seen other blockchains try that. So it's OK. If you want to try that method, you can always choose one of the other blockchains that does it that way. The other option is to substitute market forces with centralized control and decision-making by committee to give developers the power to choose what is and isn't a valid transaction. Both of those choices are inferior to market forces. So I don't think there's anything wrong with anyone using whatever capacity of the Bitcoin blockchain they want to for whatever application they want to, as long as they're willing to pay the fee and compete in the market. JPMorganCoin. This question comes from Jamie. Does it really come from Jamie, though? Maybe. Maybe that's just a pseudonym. JPMorganCoin. Just curious what your thoughts are on whether bank coins will become more mainstream, and if so, what impacts will that have on other coins? Yes, bank coins will become more mainstream. Bank coins will have more market capitalization. Bank coins will have more users, and bank coins will deliver less freedom, less decentralization, less neutrality, less censorship resistance, less borderless operation, less of everything that matters, competing primarily with fiat and other bank coins, and not really offering any competition to coins whose primary differentiation is freedom, decentralization, open, borderless, neutral, censorship-resistant access for the world, something that bank coins cannot offer, will never offer, and as a result cannot compete with. Does that mean that they are going to be bigger? Absolutely. Richer? Absolutely. Well, guess what? Fiat is already bigger and richer than crypto. That doesn't matter. The measure of success here is not market cap. The measure of success is not how fast you can shed principles of liberty or give in and compromise to absurd regulations that impoverish people both financially and in terms of their freedom, and make them subject to surveillance capitalism and the rapacious corruption of dictators around the world. That is not the measure of success. The measure of success is how much freedom can you give to as many people as possible around the world to be able to exercise their human rights of free trade, commerce, open access to the possibility of a better future, freedom of speech, freedom of association, and all of the other important freedoms through a system of money that does not discriminate, is not controlled by a few, is not manipulated to enrich an upper class, and all of those other things that we have in fiat. Will bank coins keep coming? Sure they will. No matter what, if you start compromising your principles, you will discover that there are very big, well-funded organizations in the world that have made as their business plan the ability to compromise their principles faster than anybody else. And so that's a race to the bottom. What we should be doing is strengthening the principles within crypto, introducing better privacy, better anonymity, within these crypto systems, better fungibility, and also working on improving the technology in terms of security, usability, and all of the other wonderful things that are already happening in the crypto space. JPMorganCoin, they can have it, enjoy, have fun with that. I expect that experiments like this, especially in the beginning, will fail miserably because fundamentally they misunderstand the differentiator and value of cryptocurrencies. Fundamentally, they misunderstand the value of blockchains. Fundamentally, what they're doing is business as usual, wrapped in a disguise of innovation, which really doesn't contain any change in the fundamental power balance, which is what crypto is all about. Also, fuck Jamie Dimon. eCoin, yes. Evil Corp. It's really funny how JPMorgan Chase is quite explicitly following the plot of Mr. Robot and doing the exact plot line of Season 2, even though we know exactly how it ends, with most of their offices in flames. Federico asks, how to prepare for the next national monetary crisis? Here in Argentina, we're not very good at this currency stuff. It breaks every 10 to 15 years. It's going to happen again soon. Usually when this happens, we resort to bartering for a while, then get our savings stolen, and then repeat the cycle. What can we, the Argentinian crypto community, do so our country can be a little more prepared the next time, not only as individuals, but as a country? You know, honestly, Federico, I'm afraid there's not much we can do that we're not already doing as a crypto community. What we can do in order to help people escape monetary crisis like this is make it so that more people can use crypto in more situations in their lives in order to have more choice. Not to replace the national currency, but to have an option to exit at times of crisis and weather the storm. It's about having a lifeboat, essentially. So in order to do that, we have to make software that is better, software that is easier to use, build more infrastructure, makes things that are easier to secure, and then teach people how to use it, as well as teach people the principles of this ecosystem so that they can understand how to choose the system that best fits their principles and their needs. We need to teach people about the difference between systems that are open and decentralized versus systems that are closed and controlled. We need to teach people about the benefits and importance of privacy as a human right in financial transactions. We need to teach people about the importance of the 5 pillars: open, borderless, neutral, censorship-resistant, and decentralized systems. So with that, education, infrastructure, and better user experience. And guess what? Argentina is already doing all of those things. There are at least half a dozen amazing crypto projects that have either their base in Argentina or extended staff in Argentina that are building amazing products with great skilled developers and are helping move cryptocurrency forward. And so I think you're already doing everything. It's not going to be ready yet. And it may take a decade before we start seeing an impact on monetary crisis. At the moment, it can only help a very small percentage of the population escape the monetary crisis. But as time goes by, and as that percentage gets bigger and bigger, it changes the world. Okay, checking back in the chat room. It doesn't take much to get you all excited and jumping up and down, right? All I have to say is throw out an obscenity about the CEO of a bank, and everybody's cheering in the chat room. You want to rename this to the F. Jamie Dimon Q&A. Very nice. Enrico asks, Bitcoin dust. Could you please explain what Bitcoin dust is, why it's bad, how it can be avoided, and if in the long run, in the extreme scenarios, it could damage Bitcoin owners or the network itself? All right, Enrico. So what Bitcoin dust is? Bitcoin dust is amounts of Bitcoin that have become part of the UTXO set that are no longer spendable because the cost to spend them in transaction fees exceeds the value of the Bitcoin itself. So, for example, if I create a transaction and part of the change in that transaction, or one of the payments in that transaction, is an amount that's maybe 1,000 Satoshis, a couple thousand Satoshis, or something like that, then the cost to spend that single chunk of Bitcoin that's only 1,000 Satoshis is going to be more in fees, or I'll end up paying a significant percentage of it in fees, and therefore it is in practice unspendable. Okay, here's the key point. In practice unspendable at the current price and fee point of Bitcoin today. That doesn't mean it's unspendable forever. It may become spendable in the future as perhaps the price of Bitcoin goes up and the relative percentage of fees goes down, so that, again, it becomes profitable or valuable enough to spend with a lower fee. So Bitcoin Dust, the definition itself changes. There is a specific definition, which is, I believe, anything under 546 Satoshis. I can't remember the exact number, but there's an amount that you simply can't create below. So there's a minimum amount of Bitcoin that you can create in a UTXO, and that's to prevent the creation of really ridiculous amounts of dust. In the beginning on Bitcoin, you could create a 1 Satoshi output, which effectively at any price of Bitcoin with any level of fee automatically is dust. You can't do anything with that. So it just sits there unspendable, and it takes up memory and disk space on the Bitcoin blockchain in order to keep track of an amount that really can't be spent. It's like the loose change you find in your couch, where, you know, if you carry that around in your pocket, all you're going to do is make a hole in your pants and ruin your pants, and you're not eventually going to be able to buy anything with it because it's such a tiny amount. So does it damage Bitcoin? Not really. It just sits around doing nothing. And depending on the level of dust it is, if it really is true dust, like amounts that are so tiny that you can't spend them on the Bitcoin network today or ever, then it's just going to sit around forever. However, if it's marginally dust, where today at the current fee level and the current Bitcoin price is not worth spending, but maybe in the future it's spendable again, then it's pretty harmless. This is really about how your wallet is configured to handle these amounts. So preferably, your wallet will be intelligent enough to avoid creating amounts that are too small to spend in a profitable way in the future. So it will certainly avoid the absolute dust limit that's in the protocol, but it will most likely, your wallet will try to avoid creating any small amount of UTXO that really isn't very useful to the wallet. And that's about having a wallet that does good coin management. So dust is harmless, but it can be a nuisance. All right, give me a quick second. Let me just drink some water. Oh, man. My stomach is making some noises today. And because I have such wonderfully sensitive microphones, it's probably picking it up on the video cast. So we're going to have to edit all of that out so that I appear less human on video and more perfect. I apologize for these noises. It's still very early here, and I haven't had any breakfast. And that's difficult when you're having coffee on an empty stomach. Bear with me. We're on to the next question. Could you comment on the Zcash inflation vulnerability that was recently exposed, and whether this has implications on the feasibility of base layer privacy on Bitcoin? Many Bitcoin proponents believe that the fixed supply of Bitcoin is one of its greatest value propositions. Is there a risk that by obfuscating the base layer for privacy reasons would make it less auditable and create a risk of an inflation bug that goes unnoticed for quite a long time? In the case of ZK snarks, the vulnerability existed for 8 months. And if I understand correctly, there's no way of knowing if it was exploited. Would it not be reckless to deploy nascent cryptography on the whole network, given the fact that second-layer solutions may prove to be sufficient? So this is a great question about the balance between privacy technologies and the risk that privacy technologies introduce in the form of an inflation bug. So let's explore this a bit better and explain what exactly is happening in this case. So one of the important privacy technologies is the ability to encrypt the amount of a transaction so they can't see how much money is being moved within a transaction in such a way that you can still audit the amount without knowing what it is. And there are a number of different techniques to do this. Zero-knowledge proofs of various forms. Zero-knowledge proofs are proofs where you can prove that something is true without knowing the specific details. For example, within a UTXO set or within a transaction itself, you have a certain number of inputs on one side and a certain number of outputs on the other side. A transaction is valid if the total of inputs minus the total of outputs is equal to an amount greater than or equal to 0, is equal to the fees, which is the leftover, or 0 if there's no fee, which is unlikely today. But let's say the total on each side of the equation should balance. You should have effectively double-entry bookkeeping. You shouldn't be able to spend more money than you have. Now, if the amounts are encrypted, how do you know that they add up? And that's where you get a zero-knowledge proof. And the zero-knowledge proof is where you can do mathematics. You can do basic arithmetic on two values that are encrypted in a way that doesn't reveal their value. So you can do subtraction. You can do a range proof, as it's called, where you can show that the encrypted values of the inputs, let's call that bananas, minus the encrypted values of the outputs, let's call that apples, is within a range that is greater than 0. And you don't know what number bananas is, and you don't know what number apples is, but you can do the mathematics and say, you can do the arithmetic and say, bananas minus apples greater than 0. And that's it. That's what a range proof is. Now, if there's a bug in there, what you can do is actually create Bitcoin on the encrypted side of outputs, or create the cryptocurrency of the system in a way that increases the supply. You're essentially generating currency from nothing and introducing it into the supply in a way that can't be detected because the values are encrypted. They'll still validate in the long term. This is a very serious bug. In the case of Zcash, fortunately, it happened in an environment where there hasn't been much use and it's still very experimental. And this is a great lesson for Bitcoin. This creates a fundamental challenge for privacy. If you introduce privacy in the base layer of a cryptocurrency that has very strict monetary characteristics, what if there's a bug in the range proofs of that that cause a significant inflation bug? This is one of the criticisms levied against zero-knowledge snarks, ZK snarks as they're called, because this is relatively new cryptography. And as a result, it hasn't been broadly tested. It has been extensively peer-reviewed, but it hasn't been broadly tested. And it's quite complex stuff. So in this case, there was a bug. The bug was actually goes all the way back to the equations in the white papers describing ZK snarks. So it was identified, one of the equations was wrong, and no one noticed for 8 months. So the question is, what about adding things like bulletproofs, which are used in confidential transactions, currently implemented only in test networks around Bitcoin? and sidechains like the Liquid sidechain. What about adding that technology to the Bitcoin base layer so as to improve the privacy of the Bitcoin base layer? Is it too early to add that technology? I don't know. And is the risk too great that that might introduce an inflation bug? I think the argument that you can do it in second-layer solutions and that's sufficient isn't absolutely true. I think a lot of the privacy solutions are much better applied in the base layer because it's very difficult to maintain privacy on the second layer if the base layer can be monitored and surveilled. However, this is a true consideration now. This is a real design trade-off. And this is the essence of cryptocurrency design, I think, and the very difficult fundamental trade-offs that exist in engineering cryptocurrencies. There are no perfect solutions. Everything involves giving a bit in one area in order to gain a bit in another area. You can't just be best at everything. And so we're going to see this debate happen very strongly. And I think it's part of the reason why it's going to be difficult to introduce privacy technologies in the base layer of Bitcoin. I hope that we will introduce privacy technologies at the base layer of Bitcoin, even if there is a small risk that there are exploitable inflation bugs that could go undetected and cause some problems with the inflation of the supply of Bitcoin. I think in the long run, the risk of not having sufficient privacy in the base layer is greater than the risk of a small inflation bug, which I think with maturity will not go undetected for very long. But this is a very difficult risk analysis, and I'm not confident about that opinion. I'm kind of leaning more towards privacy at the moment. I could be persuaded otherwise. I'm not certain or fixed in my opinion on this. I would like to hear a broader debate. I'd like to hear and understand how big is the risk. I understand the risk of not having privacy in the base layer. To me, that's a clear risk. It involves undermining the fungibility of Bitcoin, being able to introduce regulation, legislation that makes it very difficult for anyone other than criminals to use Bitcoin, because the very use of Bitcoin that involves using blacklists and whitelists and tracking addresses and surveillance and complying with surveillance regulations will make it impossible for normal businesses, for legitimate users, to use cryptocurrency. So that's a real risk, and I understand and I can quantify that risk. The problem is, on the other side of this equation is a risk that I don't understand. I don't know how big the risk of an inflation bug is. It's not zero. We know that now. We know that it's not zero risk because it's already happened. But how big is it? And how repeatable is that bug? And how many other bugs could possibly exist? That I don't know. And I'm not qualified to know it. I'm not a cryptographer, and I don't understand range proofs to that degree, so that I can evaluate that risk. So this is a broader debate that we're going to have in this community. But it's a very interesting glimpse into the very important, very serious trade-offs that exist. And maybe it turns out that the risk of inflation is much greater than the risk of not having privacy. And we really need to work about moving privacy to the second layer. I don't know. I could be persuaded either way at this point. So we'll find out. This is a very interesting debate to come in the crypto space. And it's not going to play out just in Bitcoin. This is going to play out in every cryptocurrency that has the same fundamental challenges of protecting privacy and protecting the integrity of the currency. This is a really good question. I like this one. And actually, the person who asked this question is on the live chat. Hi, Camillo. It's really nice to see you in Argentina. Thank you for coming to my happy hour. It was a lot of fun to share a beer with you. And let me see if I can answer your question now. Why can't we securely download a pre-synced blockchain? Why do we need to run Bitcoin Core to check the whole blockchain before running a full node? Since the blockchain is data, why can't it be securely downloaded, checking its hash like any other software, and only after that have the node start validating transactions? This is a really great question. We can download the blockchain. I can make a full copy of the blockchain, and I can create a hash for it, and your node can download it, and even not validate it. In fact, there are checkpoints within the blockchain so that you don't have to validate the whole thing. You can just skip validation if you want. You can configure your node to do that. What's the benefit of doing this, though? Let's look at the practicality of it. So first of all, if I create a copy of the blockchain and I publish a hash to that copy, someone has to validate it in order to validate that hash. And both the hash and the copy of the blockchain need to be stored somewhere. And then I make it available for people to download and skip validation up to a certain point. How would they download it? You know, maybe they would use FTP or HTTPS. OK, that's not very efficient. Maybe a better one would be, how about BitTorrent? So we can make a copy of the Bitcoin blockchain available on BitTorrent, and then you could download it fast, and then you could skip the validation and confirm the hash. But what you've done there is you've put trust in whoever created the hash, and more importantly, in whatever validation you have that that hash is real. So effectively, you're trusting a checkpoint and not validating for yourself. And really, the validation happens pretty fast, depending on how you do it and how much RAM you have. You can do it relatively fast. The download takes more time, and really the best protocol we would have for that is BitTorrent. But hang on a second. What is the Bitcoin network? It's BitTorrent. The Bitcoin network itself is a peer-to-peer distributed hash table propagating flood network that allows you to connect to 8 or 10 peers and request blocks and then reconstruct them in a chain, independently downloading bits of it until you have a full picture. That's BitTorrent. So we already have a dedicated BitTorrent network for downloading the Bitcoin blockchain. It's the Bitcoin network. And it already has all of the checkpoints and validation in it. The best part is you don't need to trust anyone because all of the nodes are doing the checkpointing and validation of all of the blocks before they send them to you. So, and you can configure your node to skip validation to a certain point. So we already have this. The difference is instead of using a protocol outside of Bitcoin, we're using Bitcoin. And in fact, it's faster to use the Bitcoin peer-to-peer network than to use BitTorrent or FTP or HTTPS. The nodes are already out there. They already have lots and lots and lots of copies. Best, it's not a static copy that you snapshot every now and then. It's a live copy that keeps growing, so you can always get the latest one. You don't need to worry about whether the blockchain you found on BitTorrent is 3 months old, and then you're going to have to download a whole bunch of new blocks, and how often someone's going to update the snapshot, and how often they're going to update the checkpoint. So the reason we can securely download a pre-synced blockchain is because any mechanism for downloading a pre-synced blockchain is less efficient and slower than using the Bitcoin network to download a pre-synced blockchain. That's why. OK, let's check in the chat room. Enrico asks, your thoughts on the Kiva protocol, a distributed ledger partnership between Sierra Leone, the UN, and Kiva.org? Enrico says, I have been a lender to the microfinance charity Kiva.org for many years. Hey, so have I. I've been a lender on Kiva for almost 10 years now. This year, Kiva is partnering with the government of Sierra Leone and the UN agencies to provide a nationwide digital identification system designed to help the country's 7 million citizens access the financial services they need to improve their lives. The development, called the Kiva protocol, is based on Hyperleger technology and is intended to solve the problems of identity and credit history for the 80% of the country's citizens who are unbanked. While I have no doubts about the good intentions of Kiva, I'm concerned about the choice of technology. Would you clarify the pros and cons of distributed ledger technology in such a situation? What are the chances of this project making a positive contribution to the financial future of the people of Sierra Leone? So here's the thing. This distributed ledger technology is centralized. That's the key insight. And one of the reasons it's centralized is because the very process of providing identification, traditional human ID in places like Sierra Leone is itself centralized. So whether you use a decentralized blockchain or a centralized blockchain doesn't make a huge difference if the source of the identity documents, the source of the truth, the thing that you can't control by consensus, but has to be input into the system by an external party. Let's call this an oracle for consistency purposes. The government of Sierra Leone, in this particular case, is acting as an identity oracle that is providing identity documentations for its citizens. And that is a centralized function that is prone to corruption and vulnerabilities and lack of access and all of the other problems of identity systems, right? Whether they take that identity information and they put it in a database, they put it in Hyperledger, or they put it in a blockchain, doesn't really make any difference to the truth of that information, nor does it make any difference to the availability and access of that information. If that ledger is being run with all of the inputs being a single governmental agency, then whatever truth goes in, that's what truth comes out. And if it's a lie that goes in, a lie comes out. You can't create truth with a blockchain. You can only preserve truth that is already there, or you can enforce the things that are subject to the consensus rules. And of course, human identity isn't managed by consensus. It's certainly not a decentralized consensus. So what is the benefit of this? Arguably, if you were to build a database, one of the interesting things about that database, or interesting questions for that database, is how open are the application programming interfaces that give access to that database to a variety of agencies and even private organizations to access the identity information that's contained in that database? So one of the advantages that you have by using something like Hyperledger, arguably, is that at least you have an open API, a known API that can be used for cryptographic validation of integrity and validation of the records and making changes to those records and all of the other things that a DLT can do. So is it slightly better than a database? Marginally better than a database. Could you make it better by putting it on an open, borderless, decentralized, censorship-resistant blockchain? You could make it marginally better, again, but it would become significantly less efficient. So here we have a trade-off between the efficiency of using Microsoft SQL Server or an Oracle database on one side, all the way up to using, let's say, an open public blockchain, Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever, in order to install this identity information. Here's the bigger problem, though. If you give access to these APIs to public-private partnerships or private organizations, how do you protect the privacy of the people whose identity is on this blockchain? The problem is that open access to these databases effectively exposes everyone whose information is on this system to everyone who has access to this system. it becomes their surveillance database. Now, is this a good trade-off to have in a country where 80% of people don't have banking or identity or credit information and therefore do not have access to loans? The reason I invest in Kiva is primarily because of the opportunity it gives me to extend lending to people who don't have identity documents through the use of a network of relatively decentralized non-governmental organizations and charities that help people present their needs, document them, and then use a number of techniques to help them repay their loans, including building communities and group lending, consortiums, cooperatives, and things like that, which provably decline default rates, where if you have a group of people applying for a loan together in a community to build something that benefits the whole community, they're far more likely to repay their loan because they can both support each other and act as a check and balance on each other in order to make sure that that loan is repaid so that the credit of the group can continue to improve. None of that involves documentation. When I invest in 10 Kenyan women who are building an agricultural cooperative or a sewing cooperative to make garments, I have no idea who they are. I don't need to know who they are. And it doesn't matter to me whether they're documented or have a good credit rating or not. It's the power of the group that makes it. So one of the things I really don't understand is this doesn't help the Kiva model, which is rather surprising. What it does is it moves the Kiva model more to traditional banking, where the importance of identity and credit is emphasized. I'd like to move to a world where we can do lending more and more based on the power of numbers and decentralization, whereby spreading default risk across many lenders and borrowers, removing the need for identity, opens banking to more people. We don't solve poverty by creating more identity. We solve poverty, in my opinion, by making the demand for identity less prevalent, by opening more doors to the availability of funds, credit, commercial opportunities, and also liquidity to people who don't have valid government identity. We'll see. I'm very skeptical about this. I don't think the problem here is the fact that they're using Hyperleger versus whatever else. I think the problem here is the centralized origin of this identity and the idea that the primary problem with default in third world and developing countries that have credit problems is identity. I don't think that's the case, but who knows? We'll see. It's a good project. Maybe they'll do some research and we'll all learn something. All right, let me check in with the chat room. Fantastic. Everybody is having a good time. Thank you so much for participating in this live stream Q&A. After this, I'm going to go wipe the questions and start the next round. And we're going to be announcing the March live stream Q&A, which will happen probably in the last weekend of March, the last Saturday of March, as usual. I'll let you know the date soon, but within a couple of hours from now, you'll be able to go in and start asking questions, commenting, and voting. And that's really important to give me great questions to ask like you did today. And then hope to see you in a month when we do another live stream Q&A. Thank you so much for participating. Most importantly, thank you for all of the financial support that you give me through Patreon. It is invaluable in helping to support what is now a staff of 9 people who make it possible for me to scale and do more and reach more people and produce more content, more quality, and more languages than ever before. All of that is happening because of your contributions. It's having an enormous impact. And I can't thank you enough for allowing me to do this. Great. Enjoy your weekend and see you in about 4 weeks. Bye-bye.